Given what we know about Edmontonians' interest in a range of topics, our plan was to ask about Edmonton from a variety of perspectives, not just the community safety and well-being. This one has, as you well know, caused us some of our most thorny jurisdictional issues, but there are many issues that we can describe as being interjurisdictional and help Edmontonians ask a good question.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, because one thing I found, which I found to be really fascinating, is that folks who've contacted me on something that they were sort of tangentially upset about, once they get the answer, they find that they're actually far more interested in these things than they initially thought. So perhaps one of the problems with folks not being engaged is simply because they haven't been engaged. And I'm wondering if maybe that's something we can think about as far as receptiveness and a receptive audience for this information.
That's a great point. It will be our job to be interesting during this campaign so that people are curious and engaged and motivated to put Edmonton on their agenda.
Right. Okay, and I wanted to ask a little bit about the nonpartisan aspect of things, because I just want to clarify, to my mind, nonpartisan means that you present the evidence, you present the need, you present the potential solutions, and then you present what is being done or not being done. And to me, that's nonpartisan. That's evidence-based sort of information for the public. If there was an ideological slant to it, if there was like other things involved, maybe that would be partisan. So just sort of your thoughts on how we actually present things in a nonpartisan way, but still present the necessary facts that people need to know.
I think data-driven, evidence-based and fact-based is key, as is a dash of understanding that whatever government ends up being in power is the government that we will be working with. And so we need to be judicious about the tenor of the conversation with Edmontonians.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you're just presenting facts, I would hope that the tenor is just these are the facts. And this is I guess this is a touchy subject, but I guess there's no way to answer it, so I'll just leave it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tang.
Just to move to receive this report for information.
Thank you. Receipt of information has been moved. Any further questions? Speaking to the motion then, Councillor Paquette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I'll say what I couldn't say as a question, and that is that it's really unfortunate that hurt feelings or egos get involved in politics. It's actually one of my hugest pet peeves. It would be nice if everyone could just get on the same page, look at the facts, see what's needed. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. And that is an absolute, to me, failure of leadership. And by the way, I might have just hurt someone's feelings by saying that, which is kind of silly. But that's the world we live in. It would be nice if we could just present to Edmontonians the facts at all times and say, these are the facts, these are the potential solutions, what's the best way to go about this? And they could have their say in that, and they could advocate with their governments with that, and everyone would be on the same page. Unfortunately, we live in a world where ideology and perspectives color how people will approach potential solutions in such a way that sometimes they disregard the facts or massage the facts in a way that delivers the result that they would prefer. And that's a danger in all human interactions and all human decisions. So having more information like this hopefully helps tease out more of a logical side of approaching issues. One of the things I've lamented with perhaps a few councillors is that it would be nice if what we could focus on was city building within ourselves and with administration and with the people of Edmonton and with the province and with the federal government, rather than being dragged into what are essentially wedge issue cultural battles. which serve no one except for power. Creates a team sports dynamic that is unhealthy for democracy, and clouds the serious issues that we need to be talking about. When that occurs, I feel like there is a disservice to Edmontonians and to the public. And I feel that the role of leadership should primarily be one of elevating conversations and presenting information in a way that is untouched and uncolored by the mood and feelings of the day. And that would actually help us go a long way. And I think that's what people are generally looking for, but they're not served that way. And at least I hope on a municipal level, we do serve Edmontonians that way. And that's what I would love to be able to present to them. A report like this helps present it to them. And a last word, I have to say, this report is phenomenal. I read it with absolute delight. And I was so proud to read it. And I'm very proud of our administration for delivering this. It is one of the best pieces of clarity I have seen in my time on council. And despite the spaghetti of that one chart, I mean, if that was an interactive display, it would be very, very easy for people to understand it. And so thank you once again. I really love this. I cannot say enough good things about it. And I will be sharing it with my constituents as much as possible so that they can understand where we're at. I mean, I personally still have some more questions, but I think those can be taken offline. Mr. Chair, thank you for your time, and to committee, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
May I say one thing, even though this is not my turn?
Yeah, we're a committee, sure.
Just to say that the compliments also need to be reflected back to the councillors who gave us their generous input. And so the report is good because the input was good. So thanks for that.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone further to speak? Councillor Tang to close.
Nothing further, just that I wish I provided feedback. So apologies for that.
Thank you. Please vote.
We have 4 votes.
Please display the vote. That is carried. Thank you. Thanks again very much for the presentation and the report. We'll now circle back to item 7.5. I believe Councillor Jans has been able to rejoin us and take the report, or pardon me, the presentation on that to start with. Not sure we'll have too much time after that, but we'll see how it goes.
Good afternoon, committee members. Next slide, please. My colleagues from Community Services and Assessment and Taxation and I are here to present a report which considers how the property tax system may assist in addressing derelict properties in our city. Specifically, we were asked to provide options for both residential and non-residential derelict subclasses to allow for different tax rates on derelict properties, details of a grant program that would incentivize redevelopment, and an approach to increased demolitions, including through tax forfeiture. This report came about after Council expressed interest in options to address problem properties. One of the first things I'd like to note is that derelict properties and problem properties are not the same thing. Derelict means to be in a state of disrepair or neglect, where a problem property tends to be thought of as one drawing excessively on civic services like fire, police, bylaw enforcement, and community outreach. It is certainly possible that a property is both derelict and a problem, but that is not always the case. Under our legislation, we are able to create a subclass for derelict properties, but we are not able to create a subclass for problem properties. While tax can be used to encourage or discourage behavior, that's not its primary function. Property tax is first and foremost a revenue-generating tool meant to distribute the property tax levy. As a tool of behavior modification, it has limitations, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. In the following tax subclassing conversation, we are concerned with properties that meet the definition of derelict. Next slide, please. We've proposed two approaches to defining a residential derelict subclass, though there are others. A narrow approach would rely on the list of properties deemed unfit for habitation by Alberta Health Services. This would apply to about 100 properties in Edmonton, but may also capture properties that are not problem properties and may not necessarily appear from the outside to be derelict. For example, they may be unfit for habitation and deemed so due to a pest infection. The advantage of this approach is that it is objective and relatively simple to administer. Assessors would not need to consider properties beyond those with orders, which minimizes the resources required to identify and assign the tax class. We estimate it would require one or perhaps fewer FTEs. A broad approach would be based on the state of physical disrepair of the property. This would capture significantly more properties and would require a field review by assessors to ensure a consistent application of the subclass across the city. This approach would capture properties that meet the definition of derelict. However, there are some flags to mention here. Properties that are in the process of redevelopment may be categorized as derelict, as would new builds that are boarded for bankruptcy of the builder or other legal reasons. The individual circumstances of the property's owners would not be taken into account when the assignment of the derelict subclass is made. This is a broad net that we would be casting, and it would likely catch more properties than may be intended. However, it does have the advantage of providing an incentive for redevelopment, particularly if it is introduced in tandem with a grant-back program. Because of the relative labor intensity of completing a citywide field review and maintaining that data going forward, we estimate this approach would require ongoing funding for up to 4 FTEs. One other note, due to the limitations with our assessment and tax software, at the present, we would only be able to apply the non-residential tax rate to a new derelict residential subclass. In other words, without technology investment in the system, we could only establish a derelict subclass tax rate that is approximately 3 times the residential tax rate. However, further investment in our system would allow for more flexibility in the future. Next slide, please. To help put the volume of fieldwork necessary into some context, here is a map of properties that the Assessment and Taxation branch has already identified as meeting the broad definition of derelict. Next slide. Whereas this is an image of the properties identified by other data sources such as fire rescue, community standards, and Alberta Health. So to be clear, the properties shown here are unlikely to be a one-for-one match of properties that would fall into the broad definition of derelict properties. We would still need to review these as well as all other residential properties to make a determination of which of Edmonton's residential properties meet the definition of derelict if council was to choose to implement a derelict subclass, if it was broadly defined. Next slide, please. Another consideration is that although the status of a property can change over time, assessment legislation requires us to make a determination of condition of the property at a single point in the year, which is December 31st. That status essentially remains static for the subsequent calendar year, which is also the taxation year. So this creates a situation whereby a property may be demolished or improved during the calendar year, but would still be liable for a much higher tax rate until the reassessment occurs on the following December 31st. This effect may be mitigated by a grant-back program, as we'll touch on later. Next slide, thank you. Turning to non-residential properties, retail, office, industrial, and so on. While provincial legislation allows for very few non-residential subclasses, Edmonton City Charter does specifically allow for a derelict subclass for non-residential property. To be defined as derelict in the and to be assigned a non-residential derelict subclass tax rate, the Charter requires that the property be unoccupied for 1 full year. Frustratingly, the term unoccupied is not defined in the regulation, which means that property owners may be able to defeat the assignment of a subclass relatively easily. For example, entering the property once a year may provide sufficient evidence of occupation to overturn the application of a subclass. The City of Calgary is the only other municipality that has this power, and they do not have a non-residential derelict subclass. So that means this assignment has yet to be properly tested in law. There are also some other constraints imposed by legislation. The city's highest non-residential tax rate can be no more than 5 times the lowest residential rate. This means that at the moment the tax could be increased by no more than about 64% of its current rate. And as noted earlier, the limitations of our software system are such that we, at the moment, cannot apply a different tax rate other than the existing non-residential rate unless investment in our system is made. Next slide, please. We were asked to investigate a possible grant program to incentivize redevelopment of derelict properties. A property subclass must be applied by an assessor based on the condition of the property as of December 31st, and the subclass applies throughout the year. A grant program could be used to maintain the incentive to redevelop a derelict property throughout the year by granting back the additional taxes after the property has been redeveloped during that year. So, for example, the derelict subclass is applied to a property on the assessment notice sent in January. Property taxes are then levied in early May and would be about triple what the property owners had paid in the previous year when they were not subject to the derelict subclass. The property owner undertakes renovations during the spring, and in our hypothetical example, the property would no longer be considered derelict by June the 1st. Under Alberta's assessment and taxation laws, the owner is still required to pay the full tax at the derelict rate by the end of June. However, if a grant-back program were to exist, they could also apply for an offsetting grant. And this grant would refund the owner, for example, hypothetically, this grant would refund the owner for the additional taxes paid for the remainder of the year, providing an additional incentive to fix the property in a timely manner. In other words, the owner would effectively be charged the derelict rate for the portion of the year that the property is in fact derelict, and the normal residential rate for the remainder of the year. Next slide, please. Assessment and Taxation and the Community Property Safety Team has reviewed the list of potentially derelict properties against the list of properties that have become available to the city through tax forfeiture. And we found that there was actually very little overlap. There were actually only 5 properties that appear to meet the proposed broad definition of derelict that are available for the city to claim through tax forfeiture. Aside from tax forfeiture, the Community Property Safety Team pilot that began in April 2022 has shown some very positive results. The figures on this slide have been updated today, and they are that 10 properties have been voluntarily demolished by their owners after receiving orders for securement. 2 properties have been renovated and are now legally occupied, and 31 properties have been secured through orders issued by the team. As a result of more prototyping around demolition of properties, a committee has been formed with staff from several city departments to further assess and expedite properties that may be suitable for demolition. When demolition is appropriate, a property-specific plan will be developed and the process will be coordinated with all relevant city departments. My colleagues from Community Services are here to answer any questions you might have on the pilot program. And with that, we would all be happy to take any questions you may have.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one set of questions. Councillor Jans exempted this item, so we'll start there.
I do not have any questions at this time.
Okay. Then, others with questions? There we go. Councillor Wright.
So will the derelict properties, would that also apply like to burned out apartment buildings that haven't gone through insurance yet?
Under the broad definition, anything that meets that definition, which certainly a burned out apartment building would, and because it is a residential building, we can apply. Yes, that would be also included in the derelict subclass, no matter what the insurance status is.
And then I'm just going back to your slide number 8, I think it was, where you've given the example about doing the grant refund of the additional taxes. What happens if the value of the property changes between, so, January, February, you've got an old rundown house, maybe valued at $200,000 or something, and then it's been redeveloped. Now it's a small condo or apartment building, and now it's valued at $2 million. What would you base?
It would be based on the taxes paid, and the taxes would be based on the condition of the property of the previous year. So in that example, you would be paying or granting back a smaller amount than likely the property would be reassessed at in the following year.
Okay, so they aren't going to get a windfall grant, just...
It wouldn't be a windfall grant. The maximum, according to the grant program we have envisaged, the maximum would be what they would pay under the old scenario as a residential property. Goodness, have I explained that well enough? Yeah, okay.
Makes sense to me. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll give someone else a chance here before we go. Okay.
Okay, Councillor Salvador.
Sure, thank you so much. Really appreciate the report. And I apologize, is there echo? Is that maybe just on my end? I'll continue.
You're okay. Yep.
But yeah, so I'll start with the residential side. So recognizing that we'd be limited to sort of triple the tax rate for derelict residential properties. Am I to understand that anything above that would require fairly significant upgrades to the tax system, TACS?
That's right, Councillor. Our system is an older one and hasn't had significant investment since it was first created in the 90s. So we've done some preliminary questioning to our colleagues in Open City and Technology, and I will say this is a very caveated guess, but they are looking in the hundreds of thousands, I think less than 500,000, but the full amount would need to be scoped. And is that a significant investment? I guess it depends on what significant is, but it's not nothing.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that answer. And to be honest, I'm thinking of this in sort of the broader subclassing conversations that we may be having. I know there's another report coming back in the new year, and trying to get a handle on how we can get ahead of some of the upgrades that would be necessary if in the future there will be desire to look at subclassing more broadly. So I guess when will we be able to have that conversation, and would you need direction to sort of scope out and provide estimated resourcing for upgrades to tax?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I don't want to preempt clerks, but I think we are tentatively scheduled for mid-February to talk about residential subclassing in a different context, more around multi-family properties, other residential, how they are taxed, and then also what we might want to do or what council might want to do in support of the city plan on the taxation side. So that would likely be the best time for a conversation about system changes. But it's certainly true that our system at the moment cannot accommodate more tax classes than we currently have.
Right. Okay.
Which is why, as you say, it's sort of 3 times, because our non-residential rate is currently approximately 3 times our res rate. If that was also to change, we would have to make that derelict subclass in line with that non-residential rate just because of the technology.
Right. Okay. So absent of any technological improvements or upgrades at this time, we can still go with the 3 times rate. So just jumping to non-residential as well, recognizing that there's challenges around verifying that something or that a building is unoccupied. And you know, I know it was mentioned it was essentially impossible, but were things like utility information, business licensing, just alternative mechanisms or methodology for verifying occupancy, can those come into play here at all?
I would maybe ask Cameron Ashmore from our Legal Services Department to weigh in here, but as your assessor, I would say no, simply because this all comes down to what will and will not stand up in an assessment review tribunal hearing and possibly subsequently in front of King's Bench. And what the legislation says is that it must be unoccupied. And the legislation does not give us any insight into what the writers meant by unoccupied. They didn't say unoccupied as verified by utilities or by building permits. So we're really sort of having to interpret, and then we would have to put our interpretation in front of the board along with the taxpayer's interpretation. And it would be very, very difficult to say where the board might end up going. Mr. Ashmore, do you have any more to add?
Yeah, I'll disagree with you a little bit. I think those sorts of things, Counselor, can all be used as indicators, but they don't get you to a guarantee that something is unoccupied. So, for example, if we knew there was no servicing on the property, we knew there was no lease on the property, we knew that various other things, no business license, they add up, but there's no way you can take all those little pieces and get to a guaranteed outcome. It's still a little bit uncertain. And to give you an example of something that would almost certainly come up, I'm storing things there. Does that mean it's unoccupied? Well, you don't need servicing, you don't need a business license. And that's the sort of thing that would be a problem with going down this path.
Okay, well, I appreciate the answer. I'll have more questions, but I know we're out of time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that takes us to our 5 o'clock time limit. So we are in recess until Friday morning at 9:30. Thank you.